want to introduce, to set the tone and contextualize the film a little bit, the director of Mondo Hollywood, Robert Carl Cohen.
Good afternoon. Frankly, I'd rather be at the beach. But I just flew in from Boulder, Colorado, where I now live. And I just want to tell you that walking on Hollywood Boulevard today, 47 years after I shot this film, is a very interesting experience. Very interesting, to say the least. I think you'll see the difference, I hope, between Hollywood Boulevard then and Hollywood Boulevard now. The idea for making this film was part of a sequence. I did my master's in film at UCLA in 1954. I was drafted. I was a TV director in the U.S. Army and was then a cameraman at Supreme Headquarters in Paris, and then was working for my doctorate in social psychology at the University of Paris at the Sorbonne. I filmed in China in 1957 for NBC. I filmed in East Germany in 59. I filmed in Cuba in 63 and 64. I made a film about the Un-American Activities Committee in 62. If anybody wants to see them, go to my website, radfilms.com, radfilms.com. In 1964, friends of mine said, "You've made films in all these communist countries and strange places. Why don't you make a film in Hollywood?" And I said, "What's there to film in Hollywood? It's all illusion. It's just a paved-over desert, you know, with some factories in it." And they said, "Well, we think that the public would be interested in seeing a movie about Hollywood." So I said, "Okay, I'm going to take a totally different approach than in my other films. I'm going to interview people and have them tell their own story, because Hollywood is really what each one of you thinks it is." And so I went to a place called Barney's Beanery that was very popular in those days. And I said, I stood up at the bar and I said, "I'm making a documentary about Hollywood, and there are 3 criteria to be included. 1, that you be somehow typical of Hollywood, meaning that you weren't born here, you came here from someplace else to be somebody. 2, that you're pretty weird, way out, unusual, because I'm not looking for people to do a 9 to 5 staring at a wall in a cubicle. And 3, that you're both interesting and far out." And so I was besieged with people who said, me, 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 me. I interviewed lots of people. I finally settled on about 22, and I think there were about 14 or 15 in the film. Each person told me what they wanted to be filmed doing. I did not tell them. But once I said, "Okay, I'll film you," I then tried my best to film them doing their thing, jumping out of a plane, going to a beauty parlor, whatever it was that they do. About 10 months after filming, I showed each person their own sequence and interviewed them on tape in the first person present, where they're telling their own story. I was in charge of the total montage, of putting everything together, but each of the participants chose their own scenes and narrates themselves. So in fact, this is a statement by people who have come to Hollywood to be part of Hollywood. I've never met Mr. Anderson. I've heard his name. I've seen some of his films, which are excellent. There Will Be Blood, I liked very much. Boogie Nights was, groovy. I even knew John Holmes, who the film is kind of loosely based upon. And from David Griffith to John Holmes, my range of acquaintance was very wide. And I was pleasantly surprised and shocked that somebody who I've never met or spoken to would view my film as having enough merit to insist on it being shown here at the AFI. I want to thank you all for coming. I hope you, if you don't enjoy, at least appreciate the experience. Thank you. I look upon a 75-year-old as somebody who was very young. And of course, I didn't realize when I moved out of the LA basin that one of the reasons I moved out is when I found out that every year there's something like 10 million tires on trucks and cars that are replaced because they've worn away half an inch of rubber, which means that the particulate is in the air and we're all breathing it in here. But I moved to Boulder, and then, of course, after I bought a house there and got settled, I found out there was a place called Rocky Flats, only 8 miles away, where they were making the atomic bomb triggers for the hydrogen bombs. And that the Front Range, that is between Fort Collins and Colorado Springs, that 100 miles there, the Front Range is just east of the Rockies, had the highest breast cancer and the highest multiple sclerosis in the United States, due to the fact that there's 25,000 abandoned mines there, mostly heavy metal mines, including uranium, and the piles of tailings left over, ore that's not quite commercial grade. The rain washes the water from that into the water table, and so the water is killing people, breast cancer, multiple sclerosis. I double filter all my water. That helps, I hope. But Hollywood is a place, is in the mind. Although we're physically here, geographically, there is no here, insofar as the people that are in your minds, the images that have been planted in your minds through films and TV, are artifice. They're make-believe images. Paul is an expert on putting this together. I saw his film last night, Inherent Vice. Mm-hmm. I'll see it again tonight. And he was born 4 years after I made this movie. And the idea that it in any way meant anything to him is a great surprise, and I'd like to hear why.
Well, yeah. I suppose I did come to this film through Flanagan when I told him I was making Inherent Vice. He said, "I have something for you to see," and he gave it to me, and I watched it, and there's a lot of coverage about this period. I suppose you could pick up any books and magazines. There's a lot about LA, and there's a lot that I've seen. And when he gave it to me, I was skeptical, thinking, I've seen it all, and how could I really see anything else? And I put it on, and I thought, I've never seen this. I've never seen footage this good, footage this this up close and personal with people, with weirdos and straight-laced people and humane people, just all these varieties of people. And being from here and being very peculiar about my LA movies, it just touched me deeply. And as a reference as well for what we were doing, it was very easy to hand out to our crew and say, this is a little time machine to get back to what was going on. Our film takes place in 1970, but this was even more valuable, jumping back a few years before, seeing it feels, and it does feel like in this film, that you captured this like ticking bomb that was kind of just festering around here, this sort of a fever about to sort of blow up, and all this sort of communist stuff still going on, and the war in Southeast Asia still going on, and these still sort of vibrant old silent movie stars still sort of chugging along. And that was the stuff that I liked the most, is how you had some of these youthful sort of the band come in, or the zombie kids going to the pharmacist of LA's house. I mean, what the fuck was going on?
Well, the fascinating thing is, I am accused, I mean, the French, being very sensitive to such things, banned it because they said it promoted drugs. During the 18 months that I filmed, I never saw anyone use any form of drugs. Now, unlike your film, which is, I would say, in 9 out of 10 shots, somebody is smoking a joint. And remember, I come from Colorado, and we know about marijuana in Colorado. In addition to growing some very fine marijuana, we actually have legalized it and forced the entire country to start legalizing it now, because it doesn't kill you. And I have to confess, being a citizen of Colorado and being perfectly legally authorized to smoke marijuana, that I have smoked marijuana. Now, I have never, although I'm effectively a social scientist, I have never conducted any analysis of it, and I certainly would not advise anyone under the age of 15 or 16 whose brain might still be developing. But I have to confess that I even smoked it in California and in Paris 70 years ago, or 65 years ago. And it may affect the minds of people. I don't know because I haven't done the studies. The studies that I am familiar with do not indicate that effect. And in Inherent Vice, I would say that it is the leitmotif that effectively runs through the whole structure.
Well, somebody once said nobody ever got into a bar fight smoking a joint. You know, so it's like.
Well, having been in bar fights, I can only tell you that I used to drink alcohol. And I stopped 14 years ago at the age of 70. And I stopped because it stopped me. I'd been in Moscow, I'd been dancing, I'd been drinking lots of vodka. I came back to Boulder. I went to a Christmas party. I drank about 3 fingers of vodka. And next thing I knew, I was in a beautiful golden haze. I felt this groovy, floating, and there was a clear spot in the middle, and there was my wife with a stethoscope. She carries one in the car. She's trained. And she said, "You don't have any pulse or blood pressure." And I said, "Well, I really feel good." I didn't feel anything. And then the emergency room guys came in and put an oxygen mask on me, and I suddenly was in total super reality. And I said, "Geez, oxygen is great stuff. I've never done oxygen before." And about 3 weeks later, I tried to sip a glass of wine, and I felt that same vagus nerve nausea coming, and I said, "I think alcohol and I have just parted company." I used to smoke cigarettes. I used to live right up here on Hillcrest Drive, and I would walk down to the corner of Highland and Hollywood, where there used to be a drugstore, a Rexall, which is now a other thing. And for $1, I bought my 5 packs of cigarettes at 20 cents each. That was $1, and you could get 100 cigarettes for $1. And I would smoke them in one day while sitting at my typewriter in the sun lifting weights to be very healthy. While I was writing scripts about incredible films, which never got produced. 5 years ago, I noticed some blood in my urine, and the urologist looked inside of me with a laser thing and all that, and he said, "I've never seen this before in my life. You have over 30 cancers in your bladder, 2 bigger than golf balls." And I said, "Well, how come I've never had any symptoms until now, a little blood in my urine?" He said, "That's because you're very healthy." I said, "Wait a minute, doctor, there seems to be a contradiction here. How can I be very healthy with that condition?" He says, "If you weren't very healthy, you would have died long ago." "Did you ever smoke cigarettes?" I said, "Yes, but I stopped in 1964. He said, "Well, that gave you bladder cancer." I said, "I never heard of bladder cancer in cigarettes." He said, "Actually, most bladder cancer in men comes from smoking cigarettes." Well, fortunately, the technology, had it been 5 or 10 years earlier, they would have cut me open. I probably would have lost my bladder. Now the beautiful, beautiful blonde nurse with very nice breasts, she came into the examining room. She seized me by my genitals, shot some lidocaine into me. Immediately, I went totally numb. And then the doctor came in, and he stuck a fiber optic thing inside of me, and I watched it on a 3-foot color TV. I watched the inside of my bladder on television, and with the laser, he went, and he zapped all the cancers out. And here I am today. Well, the reason I bring up this rather unsavory point is there are probably people here who both drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes. I can only tell you, if you want to live to be an old guy, I'm so old I'm no longer a senior citizen. I was a senior citizen 20 years ago. If you got to put anything inside of your body, marijuana is probably one of the safest things you can do.
There was a... Do you still smoke weed? Or do you
Moi?
Yeah. It's legal here, so we're all right.
Well, let me put it this way. I don't want to advocate anything to anyone who's under the age of consent. even in California, because someone might accuse me of contributing to delinquency of people, something like that. Whatever you feel like doing to yourself is your problem, or your pleasure, or whatever it is. Do whatever you want. I don't recommend anything. I don't disrecommend it. I disrecommend smoking cigarettes, and I disrecommend drinking alcohol. I love the taste of fine wine or a nice liqueur. But unfortunately, the nature of reality says I better not do that anymore. And I enjoy life. I enjoy seeing you all. I enjoy being here. I enjoy the privilege and honor of having a very talented young man appreciate something I've done without ever knowing him or anything about it. And the fact that I'm here is totally due to his fantastic good taste. That's right.
There's so many questions I want to ask you, and I know we don't have that much time, so I want to try to knock down a few things.
We got half an hour more.
Okay. A half hour more? Okay. You started with talking about being banned in France, but the French government had a problem of their own at the time that this film was coming out. So it probably made sense from that government's point of view to not show this film. I mean, I could see it from the sort of their side of things, saying, we've got student protests going on, we're sort of trying to be fascists here, and we really don't need these kids with any more ammunition. I can kind of see their point. Do you think that was something behind?
Well, I asked my distributor, Madame Payon, who had a company called Studio Ursuline, and she had what they called the Cinéma d'Art Essai. She had about 5 little theaters around Paris, and she would show mostly Charlie Chaplin, Abbott Costello, Jerry Lewis was very popular. For some reason, the French loved Jerry Lewis. And I said, why? Why has this happened? She said, Madame de Gaulle. She's on the board of control. I said, she must be a very sensitive, perceptive person to see drugs and homosexuality, because no one takes any drugs in the film, and there are no homosexual acts, or no sexual acts for that matter, whatsoever. So she must be an extremely perceptive person to have seen something that wasn't on the screen. And she said, well, the events of '68 took place. I said, the film, are you telling me, I mean, I'm getting this very metaphysical, strange sensation that the mere presence of a copy of my film in Paris, unprojected, somehow contributed to the events of 1968, right, which I doubt seriously. And the events of 1968, as we said in the titles, led to, in fact, the collapse of the French government and the abolition of the control system that they had. And the new Minister of Culture, Jacques Duhamel, who came in 71, who had been a cameraman, by the way, they said, oh, the film is now, based on the changes made in it, is now acceptable to the whole public. I had not changed the film. France had changed. What we have going on in our lives, in the world, and this affects everybody, every place, is whatever you think today is based upon your life up until this time. There are new people being born. When they get to be 15, 20 years old, you may think that their behavior is inappropriate, because that's not the way you learn to do things. I don't know what life is going to be like 15 or 20 years from now. I hope I'm still around. I'd like to. My dad, when it made it to 95, I'd like to at least do as well as he did. Actually, my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, Moskowitz, was born in 1810, and I'll just tell you this quick little story, okay? He was a blacksmith. Okay? That was on my mother's side of the family. They were all blacksmiths. My father's side, they were accountants, which may account for some kind of weird combination. Anyway, Moskowitz had 5 daughters, no sons. And he was a blacksmith, and blacksmiths didn't make a lot of money in 1820, 30, 40, and so on. In other words, he was born before Napoleon entered Russia, okay? He had 5 daughters, no sons. And he was so poor that when the first daughter was ready to get married, he had no money as a bride's price. And so he built a little room attached to the hovel that they lived in and gave that to his daughter and her husband as a dowry. Well, about 2 years later, his second daughter was ready to get married, and again, he had no money. So he made life so miserable for daughter number one that they moved out, and he gave the same little room to daughter number two, and so on to daughter number three and daughter number four. And daughter number five never married. She stayed with her father. And the last night of his life, she made him his favorite borscht and blintzes, whatever it was he was eating, and he passed away in his sleep in 1908. Okay, only, no, 1918, excuse me, 12 years before I was born. In other words, he'd been born before Napoleon invaded Russia, and he died only 12 years before I was born. And knowing that, when I learned that, I was in my 20s, I realized that time is very relative. What we consider to be the distant past isn't that distant. The idea that everything which has happened, when I was a kid, I was born in 1930, an airplane that could go 200 miles an hour was a phenomenon. There were no jet planes. I saw television at the New York World's Fair in 1939, black and white, and the actors had to wear blue and green makeup because it wasn't red sensitive at all. And today, each of us who has a cell phone of any kind has more technology than took us to the moon in the 60s. So we are in a technological wooey happening so fast that it's very difficult to anticipate what the future is going to be. But as I said before, I'm amazed by the fact that I'm here. A week ago, I knew nothing about this. It wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't in the program. And due completely to the refined good taste of someone who wasn't born at the time, I was on a jet plane and flew in here a couple days ago, and have actually been living on the 9th floor of the Roosevelt Hotel, and the view out my window duplicates the scenes from Mondo, Hollywood. It's a combination of the full moon rising and the lights of Hollywood Boulevard all in my window frame. And I said, this is really freaky. So I am amazed and pleased by, essentially, by everything, even being sick. You know, I mean, whatever happens, it's the best of all possible worlds, as Voltaire had Pangloss say a couple hundred years ago.
But then again, I mean, I wish there were a few places in the film that still existed, you know, like some of those nudie kind of like restaurants, or the girl on the platter who's turning around. I mean, we might have advanced in our technology, but we've lost some things as well. I mean, where was that place? Do you remember?
There was even nude, topless shoe shine parlors.
Fucking great.
Of course, I have a very good memory of my infancy, and so I remember my mother's breasts were about that big when I was an infant, and I still have fond memories of them. What is it that makes the female breast attractive to us? It's obvious. We all had mothers. And you may not remember it, but way deep in the formation of your brain, the breast is the source of life to you. And it is. And so we live in Hollywood is a paved over desert with business people making illusions, images in it, and selling them to people all over the world. And there are people here in this audience from all over the world and at the AFI-FEST. I mean, to me, it's an adventure, it's an exploration, and I'm pleased by every moment of it. When I open my eyes in the morning, I say to myself, wow, I'm still here. When I walk down the street, I say, isn't it great that I can actually I can ambulate. I walk down the street, I can see people. I can even imagine that I'm going to be here tomorrow and the next day. And again, it's amazing to me to meet someone who, from this film's reference, didn't exist, who now has become a human being, seen the world through his own eyes, and made movies about it that I appreciate very much, and apparently sees a link between my old film and his brand new work. And I hope that some of you will be seeing it tonight and in the future, Inherent Vice.
Yeah. Is anybody coming tonight to see it? All right. hardcore aficionados. That's a great double bill. I think they'll see.
Well, a friend of mine said to me, sent me an email today and said, how come they're not showing Mondo Hollywood and Inherent Vice at the same time? And I said, that's 4 hours and 35 minutes. People have to go to the bathroom, you know. I mean, it's not like we have theaters with built-in pissoirs or anything. I mean, it would be fascinating if it was possible.
Yeah. Something like that. What would be a good double bill? I mean, not Inherent Vice, but what else would be a good double bill with this film? I'm trying. I mean, well, Inherent Vice would be a great double bill. That's why I picked it. But I'm trying to think. I mean, what was when you went into this film? I mean, just like you said, you didn't know about this a week ago. How much do you know when you go into? If you know you're coming here and you know you're going to find these people this way, but you're making a documentary, you can't have any preconceived ideas going into it, can you? But at the same time, you have to guide it towards something, right? Or how does that work?
Let me put it this way. When my first film was my master's thesis film at UCLA. By the way, UCLA does not list me as one of their graduates.
Fuck them.
I feel no animosity towards them because there is no them. I mean, these are just 4 letters, UCLA. There is nothing there. Back 30, 40 years ago, I would be approached by people who were doing their masters in film there and for help. They said, it's driving me crazy. What is it? What's going on here? Nobody's teaching us. I said, you go to college to learn how to use the equipment.
Right.
Okay? You learn how to turn the camera on and off, and you learn how to edit, and so on and so forth. And Steve Spielberg was in my garage learning how to cut on motion with a crayon, drawing on the movable glass screen and all that. You learn to use the tools. What you do with the tools is going to be up to you. And if you have a concept, fine. If you don't have a concept, read a lot of books. Look at other movies. Try to understand how other people have viewed the world. Maybe you'll view it the same way they do. Maybe you'll view it in your totally original, different way. Incidentally, There Will Be Blood was of a special relevance to me because I used to be an analyst in a mercury mine in 1950, even longer ago, in the Diablo Range in Central California near Coalinga. And when I saw There Will Be Blood, I said, this guy must have been in the mines because that's what it's like. At least that's what it's like in those days. John Wayne owned the mine. He'd never been there, of course. It was just a possession.
Really?
The Archer mine, and if you go on the internet and look up Archer, A-R-C-H-E-R mine outside of Coalinga, it's on the internet with aerial shots and all that. It still exists. And how did I get a job in a mine? It was a summer job at UCLA, and I figured, it'll be exciting, thrilling, interesting to work in a mine. $1.25 an hour plus food and a bed in a 4-man tent. And I went for a job interview, and they said, what do you know about mercury mining? And I said, of course, what I knew it was a mercury mine, so the night before I'd gone to a newsstand that used to be on Las Palmas here, that used to be open all night, and I found the Mining Journal, and so I said, well, mercury sold at $70 a pound on the Madrid exchange and all that. He said, oh, you know a great deal about it. And I said, yeah, it's the first thing they teach you in high school chemistry. One of the first things is how to take cinnabar, which is mercury ore, a reddish ore, crush it and heat it and so on. So I knew how to assay for it. He said, fine, we need an assayer. And I got in my 35 Buick that I bought for $100, and I drove up to Coalinga, except I blew out a rod outside of Bakersfield and had to spend the night in a Fleabag hotel with barbed wire over the transom, that kind of stuff, and worked in the mine and helped John Wayne make a lot of money because the mine wasn't being run properly, and I, with my no education whatsoever, was able to figure out what the problem was, which was very minor, difference between an 18 and 24-inch fan blade and the exhaust thing. Then, we're talking about 1950, and now we jump 60 years past that, or whatever it is, and I see There Will Be Blood, and I say, that's what it was like in the mine. This guy wasn't born anywhere near then, and he was able to capture that feel. And so, but I never thought I'd be sitting on a stage having a conversation with you.
Right. Yeah, I just made it all up. I mean, I just sort of tried to. You know, they had guys down there that we would shot in Texas, and there was a guy that was an assayer, and he kind of recreate. He sort of it was his hobby to recreate it, and he sort of showed us all that stuff and how to do it. And he stood over us, and he did it all. We just filmed it. And,
It was the most authentic recreation of a mining situation that I know about, and I used to live in Hancock Park. And so at the end of it, the house there in Hancock Park with the bowling alley and all that, that was very relevant to me. In fact, I still own property in Hancock Park. So.
Hey, but I remember from the film two things that you didn't do an epilogue for. Was the two really good-looking transvestites, Peanut and what was it, Peanut and Minnie? Minnie and Peanut. Where were I liked the way I liked those girls. Whatever happened to them?
Well. Their physical sexuality I was unfamiliar with. All I knew is what they said about themselves. Let me backtrack slightly.
Okay.
When I filmed in China for NBC, I was shooting newsreels for NBC. My stuff showed on the Huntley show the U.S. government got very unhappy with me. Especially they were unhappy because I'd had a cosmic clearance, cosmic top secret. I'd been stationed at Supreme Headquarters in Paris as a cameraman. I'd handled the plans for the end of the world, and they were. And so the idea that only a couple years later, a year and a half later, I would be going to Red China in defiance of the travel ban. The U.S. government, under our Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, had banned Americans from traveling to China. And the opportunity arose. I was hanging out in Paris with a bunch of other Americans, supposedly working on my doctorate, for which I never took a course.
And what year is this?
56. Mm-hmm. I went to a professor and I said, I found out I could get the GI Bill if I was accepted to college. I already had a master's, so I couldn't work for the master's anymore. So I went to see, I heard that they had a Department of Social Psychology. I had taken one college course in social psych at UCLA. And I went to see the head of the Department of Social Psych. And I attempted to speak French with him. And my French was very bad. I had never studied French. I was a snob at Belmont High here in LA. I took Latin because everybody else was doing French and Spanish. And I said, I'm too good for French or Spanish. I'm going to do Latin. Barely passed. But so I tried to speak French, and he said, your French isn't very good. May we speak English? And I said, thank God. And he said, what do you intend to do? And I said, well, I want to make, the title of my proposed dissertation is an analysis of films as a means of social communication. And I wish to use the communication diagram, i.e. the communicator, the communication object being the film, the communicatee, meaning the audience, yourselves, and to what degree I, as a communicator, am able to take a concept, find pictures and sounds to communicate that concept to you, the audience, and to test everything. And he said, that's a good idea. Nobody's ever done it before, and nobody's still never been done. And I said, what courses must I take? And he said, well, you've read the 7 books on the topic. There were only about 7 books in those days, and so just study on your own. So I was essentially hanging out in the cafes of Paris reading books, you know, between other activities, which one tends to do in Paris in the 50s. And you see, as a GI and then as a vet, the ratio, I think, was 7 to 1 women my age. The men had died in World War II. And so there was a great preponderance of women in their early 20s, late teens, and very few men available. So as a, you know, with PX access, I was able to buy stockings, cigarettes, vaginal foam, all the things that were not available on the French market.
Mm-hmm. And this is much better than Peanut and Minnie, man.
I'll just give
Get to China. Did you go?
So at any rate, I was having a good time, And having handled the plans for the end of the world, I said, I better have a good time because it's not going to be here that much longer. It only depends on 2 people. Every U.S. naval ship that had nukes on it needed 2 men with the codes to push the buttons. And I saw one of them brought in a straitjacket to the hospital. And I said, that guy was a captain? And they said, yeah. I said, it only takes one other guy to freak out and push the button. And once the shit hits the fan, we're all dead. And they said, yeah. So I said, well, it's going to happen. The probability is just too high. And so I said, I might as well have a good time while I'm here. And I couldn't read French very well in those days, so I saw a little article in the New Statesman and Nation, a British publication, and it said for $125, you can go by train from London to Moscow and spend 2 weeks in Moscow, room and board, and then back to London for this youth festival. So I said, hey, I can make that. That's my GI Bill money. And I talked it up, and 5 of us went. One of them, you may have heard of, his name was Shel Silverstein. He used to cartoons for Playboy in those days. So passed away some years ago. In fact, 99% of the people have passed in this movie have died, starting with Godot at the age of 2, and most recently Jim Arender, the world champion skydiver. And so we got on a train. We were drunk for 3 days between London and Moscow. We had 2 weeks of partying in Moscow. And a couple nights before the event ended, Shel Silverstein and I were walking down the street, and I said, hey, man, I wonder if we can get into Red China. And he said, we're not supposed to go. And I said, yeah, but we're having a great time here in Moscow. Why don't we see if we can get into China? He said, but the government won't like it. I said, man, the government, you know, what do I care about? I mean, Eisenhower's a nice enough guy, but, you know, I'm 26 years old, and I think China's going to be around for a long time to come. So we saw some guy walking down the street. He looked Chinese, and I went over to him, and I said, Пожалуйста, китайский делегат. I tried to speak Russian, like 3 words. And he said, I speak English. I said, great. He said, I'm not Chinese, I'm Korean. And Shel said, oh, I was in Korea with Stars and Stripes. That's the Armed Forces newspaper. He used to do cartoons for him. And this guy said, oh, yes. He says, your Air Force bombed my village. And he rolled up his sleeve, and he had a keloid, a scar, his whole left arm. And Shel turned white, of course. And he said, but we're all friends here. The Chinese are across the street. So I went and knocked on the Chinese door, and the Chinese guy answered, and I said, do you speak English? He said, yes. I said, it's great that everybody else speaks English, because we don't speak much of other languages. And as it turned out, the Chinese decided to invite any Americans who were in Moscow who wanted to come to China. Of course, this was a political act against the U.S. policy, which was banning travel to China. And I was first approached by Daniel Shore, name that means something to the older people in the audience, of CBS, and he said, are you going to accept a deal to China? And if so, are you interested in filming for CBS? Now, I'd been helping out CBS while I was in the Army at Fort Monmouth. I was doing research for the show called Adventure, American Museum of Natural History and CBS. Random genetic drift was the topic I was working on. We won't bore you with at the moment. And so they knew me at CBS. And I said, will CBS back me? He said, yes. I said, well, I know I'll be blacklisted if I go, but if CBS backs me, maybe I'll go. He came back to me the next day and he said, CBS says they will not back anyone who defies our ban on travel to China. I said, well, then I'm not going to go. He said, but Irving R. Levine of NBC would like to speak with you. I said, well, Rockefeller instead of Morgan. Because, you see, I'm educated. I knew who owned the networks. And that was what it was. Morgan owned CBS through Western Electric Corporation, and Rockefeller through RCA owned NBC. And I went to see Irv Levine, a nice guy with a little blue polka dot bow tie, and he said, are you ready to do it? And I said, it's going to, you know, I'm going to have a bad time if I do it. He says, we'll give you a camera and film and pay you. So I became an NBC special correspondent. Of course, they knew that I had a master's in film and that I knew how to work the camera. So I traveled through China with an old 16mm camera with 2 of the 3 lenses being bad. I didn't know it until months later when I saw the footage on the screen, because unlike today, you shot something, you didn't see it till it was processed and projected, which could be a long time. And I eventually came back to the United States, lots of adventures, which I'll write about someday. And the fascinating thing is they took my passport away. They refused to renew it. I went to Washington for a hearing and so on. 3 years later, I received a letter of commendation from the Undersecretary of State's office for having filmed in China because it was a new administration. It was Kennedy Johnson had replaced Eisenhower and Nixon. And so the government in Washington changed, and their attitude towards me changed. Of course, it changed back later in the 60s. And so the China film was essentially a newsreel film. And those of you who have seen it on YouTube or Snag or any of those other places, it's on 5 different locations on the internet. It's a basic newsreel. Voice of God, my voice, narrating, telling you what's going on. In '59, now having regained my passport, even though it was still Eisenhower and Nixon, they gave me the passport back. I went to film in Siberia. The Russians wouldn't let me in, so I went to East Germany, and I filmed throughout East Germany, which no longer exists. It's now all unified Germany. And I began lecturing throughout the United States. Again, I don't think there's anybody in the audience that ever saw one of my lectures, although my girlfriend from 1954 is up in the audience. and
Did you meet her in Paris?
Huh? In L.A. In
LA.
Before I got drafted, we were buddies, and she later came to Paris and so on. But at any rate, I was lecturing, and my lecture agent said to me, "Can you get a film out of Cuba?" And I said, "Sid, just because a country goes communist doesn't mean I have to go there with a camera." He said, "Well, the universities like your shows. You know, I know how to please university students. So could you get a film out of Cuba?" And I said, I am not Don Quixote. I'm not going to challenge every State Department policy there is, right? You get authorization from state, and I'll deal with the Cubans. Well, next thing I knew, there was a letter from the Department of State saying I'm authorized to go to Cuba. I and my late wife, Helene, who later became head of the LA Free Clinic. And so we filmed in Cuba in '63 and '64. And in Cuba, I tried to do something different. I tried to find people and film their story, which is what led to Mondo Hollywood. Because this voice of God, where the film tells you what's important and what to think, okay, that's one form. But if you can possibly get people who are actually involved, if I was going to do Mondo Hollywood today, I would let the word out to everybody in this audience, come and talk to me. Tell me why you're special. Tell me why I should put you in the movie. So when it finally got to Mondo Hollywood, when we started shooting in '65, I said, Mondo Hollywood is going to be a statement by the people who've come to Hollywood. Not by me about Hollywood, but by the people. And so I told each person, you will control whatever is shown about you. My only control is the overall editing of putting you together with the other people. And the amusing thing is that at the first screening for the people in the film, each one of them came to me and said, "Thank you for making a movie with me in it, but why did you put me in a movie with those kooks?" And the next guy would say the same thing. I said, well, everybody has their own point of view, including myself, and I tried to capture your point of view. Now, what you tried to do with Pynchon's novel, what you did with Pynchon's novel, now Pynchon is a very difficult writer to visualize, very difficult. And I can only tell you that about the only Pynchon book that I've ever appreciated was, I think, Gravity's Rainbow. I think he wrote it.
Yeah.
And because as a 16-year-old, I was almost a member of the Pasadena Rocket Society, so I knew what all the references were. Except I would have had to take a bus for an hour and 3/4 to get to and from the meetings, and I didn't drive in those days, and I wasn't going to make my dad drive me to Pasadena. So when Mondo Hollywood is a statement by the people who are in the movie about Hollywood, the Hollywood in their minds. To take a Pynchon novel about Hollywood, written before you were born, so you don't have the frame of reference of having been there, and to try to translate it with actors, none of whom were alive at the time, is a very, very difficult task. And overall, the marijuana use throughout the film, basically, it was there. I didn't film it. I was invited to acid sessions. Do you want to come film an acid session? I said, okay, I've never filmed an acid session. So I showed up with my 35 millimeter cameras and my 4 sun guns. All my equipment was in the trunk of my 65 Plymouth, by the way. That was the van, and I had one assistant that helped me carry stuff. Otherwise, I did it all with my own little hands. And I got to the party, and I watched the people, and I realized it was all in their heads. There was nothing physically to see. They were seeing things, but there was nothing I could film. The special effects that I stuck in with Final Cut or something at the end in the dance sequence, that's a technical event. I only assume that's something like what people saw, but I don't really know. To do what you did, to take a novel about a period long past and to try to visualize it and to capture a flavor of it is extremely difficult. I think you did it. I hope that the publicity department at Warner's knows how to let the public know about it. I saw the trailer on it. I don't think the trailer really captures the essence of what you did. It seems to be very clean and nice. But I think what you got at great effort. I think you got into the soul of what was happening at the time.
Well, thank you. Through the support of your film, and I could keep talking or let you talk all night. I mean, this is really amazing. But we got to wrap it up because we got to get ready for the next show. I'm getting a signal. Okay. Thank you very much for coming here from Colorado. Thank you for your film.
You.
Thank you for talking with us. Thank you.